This is Patrick Russell. I'm interviewing Emily Caudill for the first time. This interview is taking place at July 19th, 2021 in Billings, Montana. This interview is being conducted by the Making History Project. How are you doing today, Emily?
I'm doing pretty good.
All right, and can you tell me when you were born?
I was born September 6, 1976.
All right, and where were you born?
In Durango, Colorado.
All right, can you describe for me your hometown a little bit?
Well, at the time, my hometown was a little town of probably about 10,000 people, and our key to fame was the little narrow gauge railroad that all the tourists came to see, and then our famous ski resort. And everybody was pretty close-knit, and just a really good childhood. And
how big was your family growing up?
Growing up until the age of about 10, I had one biological brother and then my mom and my dad.
All right, and what did your parents do?
My dad kind of did this, that, and everything else. He mostly fixed guns and did some custom welding work for people around town, and my mom was a secretary for the most part.
Okay. And you went to high school, right?
I did.
And you graduated? And what was the name of your school?
I graduated high school from Miramar High School in Miramar, Florida.
Okay. And when was that?
That was June 18th, 1994.
All right. And what did you do after high school?
Well, immediately after high school, I joined the Marine Corps. In fact, my mom had to sign the waiver to get me in.
All right. And when you were in high school, did you have any sports or hobbies?
In high school, I played football my sophomore year. I was the kicker for the football team, and then they got a coach that didn't think girls should play on a boys' football team, so I played soccer my senior year.
Okay. Did you make any field goals?
No. Well, I did as kicker, yeah.
Yeah.
And then as soccer, I did okay.
All right. Extra points?
Yes.
In the football team?
Absolutely.
All right. Good deal. So you joined the Marines right out of high school. And what about the Marines made you want to go to them?
Well, so in 1986, this movie came out that a couple people saw. It was called Top Gun, and I had to be a fighter pilot. And so I had spent from the age of 10 on working on everything I could accomplish to get straight A's and everything so I could go to the Naval Academy and become a fighter pilot. And I got accepted to the Naval Academy and was all set to go, and then my senator already had all of his seats filled. And so my dad didn't have enough of a disability from the Navy to get a presidential nomination, so the Naval Academy was out. And so I started kind of figuring out how I could get some college under my belt to go to officer training school, and one day I was contemplating at lunch, and the Marine Corps recruiter arrived on the scene and said, "Hey, what are you doing after school?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to do this and this." He's like, "Well, you know, the Marine Corps will give you $34,000 for college if you join in a technical MOS. And I'm like, "What? That's 2 years at Arizona State. No way." And he's like, "Yeah, let me just talk to your parents because you're not old enough to sign." And I was like, "Okay." So he came over that night, and I told my mom what was going to happen. She's like, "You're not joining the Marine Corps. I don't care what they have to say." So he gets there and he sits down and he talks about my plans, and he says, "And since we'll be putting her into a technical MOS, we'll give her $34,000 for college." My mom grabbed the paper and signed. And so that was my enlistment into the Marine Corps, and that was in May, I think. I graduated in June and left in September.
And so you were, what, 17 at the time?
I had 2 weeks before I left for boot camp, I turned 18.
Okay. And so what was the technical MOS that you were supposed to do?
Well, at the time, he was looking at putting me into some sort of intel, but I joined with a guaranteed MOS of F-18 mechanic, and then I got to boot camp and found out I was air traffic control, and then got to my MOS school and found out I was kind of glorified dispatch. I ended up dispatching aircraft to search and rescues, medevacs, and target locations. And I was actually the first woman in that MOS.
Okay. And besides the Marines, did you consider maybe any other service?
Well, so at that time it was right at the end of the tailhook scandal with the Navy, where there was all this discrimination for women and whatever, so no other branch would even talk to me.
All right. And is there anybody else in your family that was in the military?
My dad was in the Navy, and my stepdad was also in the Navy.
And when was that?
My dad served in 1953, I want to say, and I think my stepdad was a little later in maybe the 60s or 70s.
All right, so there's some military background in your family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so tell me about boot camp in the Marines. How was that?
Well, so the Marine Corps recruiter was positive that I was going to get Molly Marine and the Leatherneck Award and all these awards in boot camp because he worked my butt off getting me ready for boot camp. And every day I ran 5 miles, rollerbladed 5, and did an hour and a half of like pull-ups, sit-ups, whatever. Well, I got to boot camp and it was kind of sad compared to what he had put me through, and I actually started getting out of shape at boot camp because it wasn't anywhere close. But boot camp was really quite a struggle for me because I had grown up in a very strict household and had like no knowledge of life outside of that, and the drill instructor screaming in my face and like all of that. It was pretty interesting, but I have a couple favorite memories. One was we did this 36-hour war kind of towards the end right before graduation, and we recruits were the like protectors of the city, and the drill instructors were the enemy. And so I was actually fully camouflaged and everything out under this tree with leaves over me, and one of the drill instructors was actually standing on my hand talking about their plans to take over the city. And so I was actually, after they got off my hand, I was actually able to radio ahead and warn them of what the plan was. So it was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah. No concept I was there.
That is cool. And is it just like the movies with the yelling in your face, the Marines?
There was a lot of yelling in my face. And I remember, I can't remember what they called them, but they did these like spot checks of your footlockers, and if anybody's footlocker was unlocked, they'd dump it, and then they'd knock over the cots, and they'd flip over all the other ones, and then you had like 5 minutes to get it all straightened back out and put back in order. We did that so many times.
And how many other women were in your recruiting class for basic training?
We started out at 54, and I think we ended at 42.
And then how many men were in that?
At that time, there weren't any men in with us, and so we were completely separated. We were 4th Battalion Marines, and that was it. We didn't interact with them hardly at all, except maybe when we hit to weapons training, and then I think there were some of them around, but really we were separated.
So all the women were together.
Mm-hmm.
And your drill instructors, were they women or men?
All female.
Okay. And so they were just as tough as what you would expect the men to be, the drill instructors.
In fact, the male Marines that I traveled with a couple times, they were like, they're much meaner than the male drill instructors.
Wow. All right. And can you tell me a little bit about what you did in basic training? Describe it for me, please.
Well, there were a lot of sit-ups and push-ups in the sandbox with the sand fleas. That was really a lot of fun, and they really liked it if it was extra hot outside or anything like that. We did quite a few classes in the classroom learning about ranks and history and, you know, all things Marine Corps, so we could really see where we've come from and where we're going and all of that. Lots of physical training, drill instruction where we flipped guns around and marched in time and all of that kind of stuff. Overall, the time really flew by, and we had night watch where one of us would have to stay and march around the squad bay while everybody else slept to make sure we were all safe, and weapons training was pretty fun.
How long was basic training?
13 weeks.
And where was it?
Parris Island, South Carolina.
And what type of weapons did you train on?
Oh, you would ask me that. I think it was the service rifle. It was a M6, maybe? I can't remember, because when I hit my duty station, I had like 12 weapons in my control, and so I don't remember all of them in boot camp.
Alright. Do you recall what type of weapons or equipment you were qualified to use?
I was qualified to use a 9mm, an M240 Golf machine gun, an M2 grenade launcher, a 50 cal, and then our service rifle.
Alright.
M16, that's what it was.
Okay. The famous M16.
Yep.
And so while you're in basic training, are you missing home at all?
It was terrible. Like, we weren't allowed to make phone calls, and my mother wrote me like almost every day, and I was there for Halloween and Thanksgiving and almost Christmas, and so my mom would write me letters in the shape of whatever the holiday was, and it was just really rough. Like, I cried almost every night wishing I was back home with my mom yelling in my face instead.
But you didn't quit.
Nope.
Now, you said there were 55 and 42 graduated. What happened to the other 13?
We had a couple that ended up going to psych because they just couldn't take all of it, and actually one of them snuck some bullets in and was going to hurt one of the drill instructors. And then we had 4 or 5 that went to what we called medical platoon, where they were like too heavy, or weight was out of control, or they have some sort of medical condition or something like that. And then I think there were a couple that just flat out quit, and then we kind of gained and lost some to other platoons depending on what was going on and stuff.
So what type of training were you receiving now after basic training? Did you then go get additional training?
I did. I went to Marine Corps Communications and Electronics School in 29 Palms, California, and that's where I went for my Air Support Operations Operator 7242 training.
Alright, what does that all entail?
So basically, it's a communications system that is what they call tactical control of aircraft. And so we don't use radar or anything like that. We communicate via these radios and we can communicate directly to airplanes or pilots or infantry or whoever, strictly via radio. And we learned, not to hold the button down too long, to transmit too long of a signal, so that they couldn't directionally find us and then perhaps bomb our location or any location that we might be with.
Alright, so this is a specialized type of radio?
They were encrypted, but really it was like the ones you see in the Vietnam movies. I don't think they were much newer.
Right, it's portable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
the ones we used mostly when we were doing tactical control of aircraft were in a 7x7 communications box, and there were 7 of us in that box. And there was one on each of the main nets. There was the target locations radio, then there was a medevac radio, a search and rescue radio, and then there were 2 lieutenants that were kind of commanding us, and then 2 lieutenants that were communicating to the aircraft.
Alright, so you've got a team and you're coordinating various operations.
Exactly.
When you say a box, you're talking about something on wheels?
So this box could be anywhere. We could put it on the ground, we drove it around in 5 tons, we put it in C-130s, just depending on what the operation required.
Okay. And what was your role in that team? What were you specifically in charge of?
I operated any one of the 3 radio nets for medevac, search and rescues, or target locations.
And tell me a typical activity that you're doing. Like, you're receiving information from who, and then...
So like, for instance, the infantry would radio for our call sign, which was Chieftain at the time, and during practice exercises, and they would say, Chieftain, this is whatever their call sign was, requesting search and rescue, medevac, or artillery to such and such a location. So then I would take down all the details, and then I would talk to one of the lieutenants and say, hey, so-and-so is requesting whatever it was, and then the lieutenant would contact the planes that were circling around and tell them what they needed.
Got it. And how long was your training for that?
My training was 2 months for that.
Okay. And like what kind of things would you do in terms of training?
We did a lot of communications exercises, you know, timing how long we were pushing buttons and learning how to read maps and figuring out where pilots were without actually knowing where they were, and being able to phase control ashore, which we would basically start talking to the pilots and everything like that, and as the Marines or whoever were going ashore, we would send some of us out there, and then we would phase control ashore to whoever was then on land.
And you're also learning all the acronyms.
Oh yes, lots of acronyms and call signs and
Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta,
all of the
Echo.
alphabet. Yep, all that fun stuff.
Okay. And then after you're done with that training, what do you do next?
So I actually went to my first duty station, which was the Marine Corps Air Station, Cherry Point, North Carolina. I got there, I think it was in March, and nobody would take me. I got to the front gate with my orders in hand, and the people at the front gate said, "Those squadrons don't have women with them. We don't know where you're supposed to be." So I sat at the front gate for probably 4 or 5 hours while they talked to the squadrons, the 2 squadrons that I could go to. One was the Tactical Air Command Center, and the other one was Marine Air Support Squadron 1. And so they went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and finally the TAC decided to take me. So I go to the TAC, and they get me in the barracks, and they don't know what to do with me, so they just leave me in the barracks for a couple days trying to figure out what I was even supposed to be doing. And then I'd been there probably 4 days, and Marine Air Support Squadron said, "Hey, I think you have our woman Marine. Can we have her?" So then I went over to Marine Air Support Squadron, and it was just really awkward, we could just say, because there was one other woman in the whole squadron. She was actually a radio tech, and my people had no idea what I was supposed to do. The section of Marine Air Support Squadron 1 we were the Direct Air Support Center, and so all guys, so the only thing they knew to do with me was they set me in a chair and played monkey in the middle with me with a racquetball for 2 weeks until they could figure out how they could act around me, how they could do everything. All of their periods of instruction had like porn in them, and they would all freak out as soon as one of the pictures would come up because they didn't know what I was going to do. It was just pretty interesting at first, and then all of the hazing and fun tricks and games that they did on all the newbies.
And so, did they have separate barracks for women?
Yeah, so they had like a selection of like 3 rooms in our 3-floor barracks that we stayed in.
Okay. So that wasn't so much of a surprise.
No.
They just didn't know what to do with you personally.
Yeah. And then a couple weeks later, some of the other women Marines that I had gone to school with started coming, and it got a little bit better.
All right. And then once you ease in and once they become comfortable with you, what do you start doing then?
So most of the time we just kept learning what the new call signs were, where new stations were being built, what was currently going on in the world. And then the fun hazing, where we got told that we were carrying highly explosive frequency grease, and of course none of us knew what that was, and in reality it was hand soap in a little metal container, but they didn't tell us that. And then they told us to go get 100 miles of flight line and go talk to the Pricky 7 radio because it wasn't working right, and it ended up being a gunnery sergeant because that's what an E7 is. And it was a lot of fun and games at first, and then after I had been there, I don't think I'd even been there a full month, I got deployed to Fort Bliss, Texas for a combined arms operation with Belgium and Holland.
And what year is this?
This is 1995.
Okay. And they didn't force you to shave your hair, did they?
Nope.
Okay.
I had to keep it above my collar with no pins or ponytail holders or anything showing.
So you did have to get it cut then?
No, I figured out how to hide bobby pins and rubber bands and all of that.
Got it. All right, so now you go to Fort Bliss, and what are you doing there now?
So at Fort Bliss, I actually was part of the Tactical Air Command Center, who was practicing phasing control ashore with Holland and Belgium, like we were taking over the Netherlands or something like that. And the irony is that we could never get communication up. It just never seemed to work. The heat or something, all of the radios crashed. So basically, us in Belgium and Holland learned about each other, drove each other's tactical vehicles. They had all Mercedes. It was kind of cool, and then we kind of investigated each other's MREs and learned that theirs are much better than ours are. And just kind of hung out at the mall and at the bar and whatever, because we just never could get up very well.
Well, that was a problem.
Yeah. Spent 2 months in a big green tent out in a gravel pit. That's where our housing was.
And this was like a exercise, what, in the event that the Netherlands got invaded by Russia and you had to take it back?
Something like that.
Okay. Well, hopefully you were successful, just not with communications.
Radios, yeah.
It's kind of important though, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what do you do after that?
So then I went back to Cherry Point, and I believe the following August I deployed to Combined Arms Exercise 9 and 10, which is in 29 Palms, California. And I believe that one is more targeted towards like desert war practice. And so we did a lot of dispatching there and communicating with airplanes and learning cool stuff. That was kind of an interesting operation, because the first time I answered the radio and recon heard a girl on the net, they completely freaked out. They were like, "Sir, there's a girl on the net!" Like, they had no idea what to do. And it actually ended up being a really fun exercise, because recon kind of taught us some of their cool tricks of spy rigging and fast roping and just all the fun rappelling they do out of helicopters. And we just all hung out, and it actually ended up being a much better exercise than usual, because usually they're just hot and miserable and all you do is work. So that one was pretty cool.
So you got to learn some more stuff.
Yep.
All right, and how long did that last?
I think we were out there for about 3 months.
All right.
That was a lovely exercise, because we lived in 10 like aircraft hangars or something like that, and they were hot as heck in August in California.
Well, they don't call you leathernecks for nothing.
It's true.
All right, so you do that training in California. Then what do you do?
So then back to 29 Palms, or not 29 Palms, Cherry Point. We did a lot of like local kind of deployments. We would go down to Camp Lejeune a lot and play with the infantry. And a lot of PT every day at 4:30 was our thing, running around. We got a gunnery sergeant about that time that was really gung-ho and liked to make us run with sandbags and carry telephone poles, and just a lot of really big strength building things. And you know, Marines tend to drink a lot, so we had quite a few barracks parties, and it was really good times there.
Now, are you still training separately from the men?
Nope, we're all together now.
Now you're integrated.
Yep.
All right. And the gunnery sergeant, how does he handle? Well, it's a he?
It's a he.
All right. And how is he handling women in the Marines? Okay?
Yes and no. I faced a lot of, "You're not really a Marine, you don't belong here" kind of stuff from some of the older Marines that have been in quite a while. They just really weren't adjusting to having women in the Marine Corps, and especially in a semi-combat field, which is what our field was.
All right. And did you spend a lot of time on the range practicing your firearms?
No, we mostly did our firearms training once or twice a year. Certified as whatever. I certified as expert, so they didn't make me go as much.
And is that more because of your role in communications?
I think so.
All right.
I think the infantry probably had to do it a lot more.
All right. And so was the new gunnery sergeant one of the more of the older generation?
Yeah. He was an old school guy.
Yeah. All right. So now you're doing a lot of PT, carrying telephone poles around.
Yeah.
Imagine you're still getting yelled at. Then what do you end up doing?
Well, then I ended up deploying again to Combined Arms Exercise 3 and 4 in 1996. That one wasn't nearly as much fun because Recon already knew about us, and so they weren't as interested, but that was the exercise where I was running the medevac net, and I got a phone call. We were actually stationed with artillery at the time, and they requested a medevac, and so my lieutenant said for me to go out and see what was going on, and I went out, and one of my friends, Lewis, had actually been shot by a 50 cal, and he died in my arms.
This is during an exercise?
I found out that exercise was kind of weird. There was a weird pneumonia going around, that if you even went they took you main site and quarantined you and did all these tests on you that you never knew what they were testing for. And I had been told by my XO, I think, that the Commandant had said that 12 deaths during this exercise was acceptable. And so Lewis ended up being one of them. And that's actually where some of my PTSD from the Marine Corps comes, because I regularly see his face and wonder what I could have done.
And how did he get shot by a 50 caliber?
I don't know that they really knew. I think they thought that it was probably like an accident, like he was cleaning it and it wasn't unloaded, or I never found out. All I know is that my lieutenant had me go check on him.
Alright, so it wasn't you were not doing some sort of a
firing exercise or something. No.
No.
And the fact that we were stationed with the artillery was like a rare event anyways, because they never put us with our actual like infantry or anything like that, because if we transmitted too long on the radio, then the enemy could find out where we were and then they could bomb all of our troops. So it was just kind of a weird event all the way around.
So you're on in your comm center, and then your commanding officer says you should go outside and check because there was a call for a medvac. Is that normal that you would send a communications person outside?
No, because we were never with them, and so we never would respond, because that's why it was so weird, is we were never usually there, and so it was just, yeah.
Alright, so you go outside and then you end up seeing your friend. Alright, and how long had you known your friend?
Well, he was one of the recon that I had met at the previous exercise the year before. And so we had been talking for quite a while, and we'd been hanging out at this exercise because it's like the only people that we really knew. His name was Lewis.
Lewis. And Lewis wasn't part of your normal communications center?
Nope.
He was part of the recon folks?
Yep.
Alright, and so that was a tough one. What did you seek, like, help for that right away, or?
No, I struggled so much with being told that I wasn't really a Marine. It actually took me quite a while, and only in the last few years, to even admit that I was a veteran.
Explain that to me. Why were you told that you were not a Marine? This is going back to the men telling you you weren't a Marine?
Exactly.
All right, and what does that have to do with Lewis? Like, connect those dots for me.
I think it was just kind of my whole Marine Corps experience, just kind of, I kind of put it aside, like hiding it or something like that. Like my mind filtered it back into the back of my head and didn't want it to harm me, so it just kept it back there.
Okay. And were there other casualties during that training exercise?
There were 6 or 7 Marines that died of that weird pneumonia, and then another Marine also died in my arms, but I didn't know him, and he was one of the pneumonia victims.
Wow, I mean, so when was this training? What time of the year?
It was in the spring of '96.
That's a weird pneumonia. Okay. Alright, so then after this exercise, okay, so after the event in which Lewis died. What happened next?
So I went back to Cherry Point and did some, local training things at Camp Lejeune again, and just kind of hung out. I ended up meeting a guy, and we were kind of dating, and Cherry Point ended up hosting a exercise, I think it was with Great Britain, and he was the shower operator, rope who operator, whatever, for the Great Britain guys, and so we kind of hung out with the Brits a lot and did the same, your MRE's better than ours, and I learned a lot about British military and that they're not nearly as appropriately speaking as some of our guys, and just some of the things they would say to me. And just, it was an interesting experience, but it was really cool kind of seeing some of their equipment and what they had and that kind of stuff.
And what kind of operation or training were you doing with the Brits?
I don't think that we were that my MOS was involved in it. I was mostly there because Jimmy was there running the showers, and so we just kind of hung out with them and did that kind of stuff.
All right, and what do you mean by running the showers?
Well, so he ran the water purification units that the water would filter back through, and so...
Okay, so literally running the shower.
Yep, literally.
Okay. And did you see any females amongst the Brits?
No.
None?
I don't remember seeing any females.
That might explain their behavior.
Very well could.
Okay. All right, and then what training did you do after that, or exercise?
So it was just kind of the day-to-day inventorying. I think we did some nuclear biological chemistry training, with tear gas and some of the other stuff, practicing our masks and just the usual downtime kind of stuff. More classes and all of that. And I didn't end up going to 29 Palms that fall. I ended up doing a 7.2 mile fun run through the woods and actually ended up tripping and completely blowing out my left knee.
Oh no.
And so that kind of was the beginning of the end of my Marine Corps career.
Alright, so you had to go get surgery?
Well, so first they wanted to do the usual physical therapy and Motrin that Navy corpsmen are so famous for. Motrin is the fix-all. And they just did all kinds of fun stuff like that, and really nothing was helping. In fact, it was getting worse, and so I was given a desk job kind of off of the platoon works, and I got invited to go to a school called the Integrated Fire Support Operations System, automated system maybe, that was the new technology of the 90s, and it was a radio, like radar almost thing that was about the size of a package of Oreos in a box about the size of a coffin, because we had to protect it because it was like a top-of-the-line computer for the Marine Corps. And so I went to Camp Lejeune to go to the training for this system because the infantry used it a lot to put in the locations where they needed support or whatever. And I dropped off the box, and the guy that was kind of running the check-in process said, "Well, who's coming to this class?" I said, "I am." He's like, "Oh no, we don't have women Marine in this class, and we don't have air wingers in this class." I said, "Well, you're going to tomorrow." And so I showed up the next day. I was the only woman in the whole class, and the instructor was like beside himself. He's like, "All you dumb infantry guys are gonna be shown up by this woman Marine, and she's gonna get honor grad, and there's nothing you're gonna be able to do about it," and all of this, giving them a hard time. Well, I did end up as honor grad and an air winger, and when my certificate of commendation went to the commanding officer of 10th Marines, he refused to sign it because there was a typo on it, because there are no male Marines named Emily. So they had to tell him that it was a female Marine and somebody from an air wing, and so he called in every commanding officer in all of Camp Lejeune and said, "This will never happen again." And he still refused to sign it, so my commanding officer ended up having to sign the CERCOM for me graduating honor grad, and of course this story was told in front of my entire squadron, which made it that much more awkward. And yeah, that was good times at that school.
So you did a really good job, but they didn't want to recognize you for that.
Yep. And to this day, I don't know if it was like jokingly or if I think he was probably dead serious that, oh no, no women. I think he was super old school, and having been in an infantry unit, women weren't allowed in infantry at that time. And so I'm sure he didn't have to have tolerance.
And did you find that frustrating?
I mostly found it funny. I think I had already seen so much of not wanting females around that it was kind of like, oh yes, here's another incidence of that. I don't know that I found it particularly frustrating. It frustrates me now, but at the time I think I was just like, well, this is what I have to do, and whatever.
And not that it really matters that much with recruiters, but how did he sell the Marine Corps to you as a woman? Was that even mentioned or as an issue?
No, not really.
No?
I think that he had already put through some female Marines, and so he definitely wasn't against us being in the Marine Corps. In fact, it was kind of his goal to kind of get as many women Marines in as he could, and so I don't think he was that way at all.
Did you, at the outset, have any concerns that you might be treated differently when you went into the Marines?
No. Everybody that I trained with in the delayed entry program, it was like a big family. Like, there was none of that. But they were also recruits, and so they probably didn't know I call it the good old boys club.
So once you started to get with the real units and the old timers, that's when you faced the problems.
Yep.
What other type of examples can you think of that you also faced besides those?
I started developing some like abdominal issues kind of stuff, and the corpsmen in our squadron always chalked it up to an ectopic pregnancy and would never do any other investigation. They just always said that it was girl issues and wouldn't investigate any further. I'm actually working with the VA right now for compensation because ultimately I developed a whole bunch of autoimmune conditions from the 27 vaccinations I got in preparation to deploy to Japan. I think they call it Gulf War illness now, or Gulf War syndrome or something. The VA is actually investigating it.
Did you ever deploy overseas?
I did not. The closest I ever got when my medical discharge ultimately came through when I couldn't run anymore, I actually was set to go to Norway to deploy for cold weather training, and then I had orders to Japan after that, when I got back from that, and I got to do neither.
And ultimately, what was wrong with your knee? Did you tear
I tore all kinds of things up in it, and when they did the surgery to try and fix it, they removed too much cartilage, so I was bone on bone and just couldn't run anymore like they needed me to.
And what was your intention in terms of service in the Marines? How long did you want to be in it for?
Oh, when I joined the Marine Corps, I planned on being a lifer because I was going to be a fighter pilot. And, kind of after I got the desk job and all of that, one of my, I don't know, captains or something like that said, that they're not going to let you fly. You're a girl. They're not going to let you fly. There are no women in flight positions at this time, and it's going to be 13 years at the earliest before you can even be selected to go to officer candidacy school to even talk about it. And I was like, and by that point, Lewis had died in my arms. I'd seen all those weird pneumonias, and I was just kind of tired of seeing death. And so I pretty much told that same captain, I don't know that I want to kill people for a living anymore.
And was it pneumonia? I mean, that was the actual...
That's what they were telling us it was.
You have your doubts?
I do.
What do you think it was?
I don't really know. I don't know if it was like a biological warfare that they were trying out, or I don't know, but the fact that they had already set body counts and they already had all the systems in place to test people, I have my question. And being a nurse now, I know what some of that consists of, and so...
And, well, now you probably see that there are women that are pilots.
Oh, yeah.
And they're all different types of service, all different types of planes, helicopter pilots, you name it.
what a difference 20 years could make, huh?
Yeah. If you were still in, would that put you in line with your officer training and being a pilot?
Probably.
Age-wise?
Yeah. Although I think I'm too old now. I don't know what their guidelines are for pilots. But
and to be a pilot, you have to be an officer?
Mm-hmm.
And is there any other particular things that they would be looking for that you had to be proficient at?
Well, I know you had to meet certain height and weight requirements. You had to have a certain degree of eyesight and hearing and all of that kind of stuff too.
And
which I had no issues with any of that in the when I was in.
Okay. And what was your highest rank while in the Marine Corps?
Well, I technically only got as high as Lance Corporal. I got out of the Marine Corps on October 1st, 1997, and that was the day that they drew the cutting score, and I had the cutting score to make sergeant that day, but because I was getting out that day, I didn't make sergeant.
And so was it a medical discharge at that point?
Yep, it was an honorable medical discharge with a 10% disability rating.
And what would be the most memorable event that you can think of from your military service?
I think probably the most memorable is we had a master gunnery sergeant that came to us from the Communications Electronics School, and he'd been out there teaching for some time and then came to our squadron, and I became very fearful of him. He was a big guy and big into sexual harassment, and since I had a desk job, he had the only printer in his office, and it became very, very awkward for me. And one day my gunnery sergeant, who was an amazing, amazing man, he said, "Are you having any problems with gunny?" And I said, or master guns? And I said, "I sure am." I said, "I'm scared to death to go down there because the inappropriate things that he says to me." And I gave him some more examples, and he said, "Well, it's been brought to my attention that every woman Marine in the squadron is having issues with this guy." Well, the master gunnery sergeant ended up with 70 pages of charges against him between the Communications and Electronics School and our squadron, and then some other people that had had interactions with him. And the Marine Corps' response was that they moved him to a squadron across the street that had no women. That was the extent of his discipline. And he would stand out by the front gates of that squadron and flip middle fingers at us women Marines and stuff like that.
Wow. Based on your experience in the military, is there anything that you still feel or impacts you today?
I think the death of Lewis, and then I have a real problem with male bosses, and I think it's just because of all of the treatment that I got while I was in the Marine Corps in a time where women were not wanted and felt not to be needed. And so I've actually gone through quite a bit of counseling and medications and programs to kind of combat the PTSD I have from both of those things.
And were you diagnosed with PTSD?
I just recently, in probably the last month or two, finally got agreement from the VA that I do have a compensable disability from my PTSD.
And that was as a result of the death of your friend Lewis?
And the military sexual trauma. Yep. They gave me a 50% disability rating for it.
And are they able to split the two events, or is it a combined?
It's a combined percentage rating. I had to talk to a psychologist who verified through behaviors and comments and whatever that indeed it had happened, and my PTSD is directly related to my service.
And can you tell me what kind of symptoms you have as a result of the PTSD today?
So when it gets really bad, like if I hear normal like medical helicopters, don't bother me. But like I can tell the difference between a military helicopter and a medical helicopter. And if I hear those, I start seeing flashes of Lewis, and when I watch the life leave his face, and just the events around it and the smells around it, if I smell that or feel that or anything like that, he comes back, and then I go into full panic mode, and I end up having to resort to some of my programs that I've gone through and the people that were in those programs as a support system.
So sound activates. Anything else that activates it?
Smells. Humvees have a very specific smell about them, kind of like the diesel, grease, gunpowder kind of smell. I had a really hard time when I would be around my dad when he was testing weapons. He used to sight in weapons for the sheriff's department, and so I would have a really hard time with the loud noises and then that smell.
And so you were having, is the proper term, flashbacks in a way? Did you have any type of like nightmares?
Oh yeah, I can't watch war movies at all if there's blood and guts in them or loud like repeated gunfire or anything like that. I can't watch them. If I do, then I have nightmares for weeks afterwards and just cold sweats, like trying to compensate. It's gotten much better since I took the Reboot Combat Recovery program, where they talk a lot about survivor guilt and shame for not being able to do stuff and that kind of stuff, and so it's helped tremendously, and they aren't nearly as bad as they were at one time.
What do the nightmares entail?
Usually it's Lewis's face and watching the life leave it and the blood everywhere, and it just keeps coming back up and back up and back up.
Replaying.
Yep.
And you mentioned guilt, so did you have that after?
I couldn't save him.
Could anybody have saved him at that point?
Probably not. He had a giant sucking chest wound, big hole in his chest. I don't even know if his heart was intact.
Was he operating a .50 caliber at that point?
I don't really know what had led up to it.
And so that incident took place when?
In the spring of 1996.
And you left the Marines in 97?
October of 97.
Right, so you were there for another year and a few more months. Were you dealing with those issues still while you were in the Marines?
I think the sexual harassment stuff kind of took the place of it at the time. It wasn't until I got out of the Marine Corps and just, people, oh, thank you for your service and all of that, that it all kind of trickled back in, and I drank like a fish after I first got out of the Marine Corps until I had my daughter, and then I kind of realized that was counterproductive to raising a child in the appropriate manner, and so I quit drinking as much, but I stuffed a lot of feelings and never talked about it, and like we talked about earlier, I just didn't acknowledge it for quite a while because I didn't want to deal with it, I don't think.
So your way of coping was to deny the fact that you actually were in the service.
Yeah.
I wasn't a Marine, and that would be your way of not having
to deal with
those feelings.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, that would only take you so far.
Exactly.
And that didn't necessarily stop the nightmares.
No.
Or the other things. And what are you able to separate, and what is more troubling to you, that event with your friend Lewis or the sexual harassment?
I think that it was really more Lewis than anything, especially being a nurse now. I see the bleeding bodies and I see all of that, and so there was a point in time where I almost had to quit nursing because I just couldn't deal with the nightmares and everything, and really finding the Reboot program, I can't even express how helpful it has been to me.
Given your strong feelings of the blood and the violence, why did you choose nursing?
Because I wanted to do the opposite of what I perceived I had done in the Marine Corps. I wanted to save people, not kill people.
Okay.
And when I got tired of being a secretary everywhere after I got out of the Marine Corps, I went down to the college and they were starting nursing prereqs the next week. I'm like, oh, I have all kinds of nurses in my family. Let's do that.
All right. And so, in a certain regard, choosing nursing is kind of your medicine.
Yeah. And my give back. Someday I hope to work at a VA medical center and actually work with the veterans.
Mm-hmm. And then, how soon after you were discharged from the Marines did you seek help for your PTSD?
It wasn't until probably 5 or 6 years ago when the VA actually started recognizing PTSD in women veterans. It had gone grossly, I don't know if it was under the rug or if they just didn't really know enough about it to really be able to help us. But once I realized that it was a real thing, that it wasn't just me that was like responding badly to a situation or whatever, then I began to acknowledge it. And I started to see some of the behaviors that I now know are associated with PTSD, and started seeing a counselor and talking about it. I started actually participating in more veterans organizations to be able to have like that camaraderie that I had in the Marine Corps with some of the men, and then I learned that it was okay that I was a woman veteran, whether they felt like I needed to be there or not. I did serve my country, and it took a few people telling me, you know what, BS. You were in the Marine Corps. You served just like everybody else did. Claim it.
And so, if I do my math correctly, is that it took you 20 years?
Yep.
Until you sought official help?
Yep.
And has that help been worthwhile?
Oh, absolutely. I have nightmares maybe once every 6 months or something now, where it used to be I had to drink all weekend because all I could focus on was that kind of stuff. I still have an issue with male bosses, but that's because women rock, so.
And what type of work did they do with you?
So really my intensive therapy started after my daughter attempted suicide in January of 2016. And it really brought out a lot of my trauma that I had experienced, having seen her lying on the hospital gurney with a big bullet hole in her belly and that kind of thing. And so they ended up doing EMDR with me, which is eye movement dissociation. I can't remember what the R stands for. But basically you watch lights go around and you listen to beeps, and then you think about the traumatic event, and it kind of lessens it for you. Your brain gets reprogrammed to not think as much about it, and that's probably what helped me the very, very most. And then going through Reboot Combat Recovery course 2.5 years ago, and just learning why I felt the way that I did about the events and how they affected me and what behaviors I exhibited because of them, and all of that has really helped. So probably, yeah, in the last 5 years I've really gone great strides.
Good. And do you still continue to go through therapy?
I do. I have a therapist at the VA center here.
All right. And is this something that they think, or you think you'll have to do for a significant amount of time, or?
I don't know. When I first started seeing the therapist, it was weekly, and we've now moved to every 2 weeks. So I think that's a good sign that probably not forever.
Okay.
I have had to start some anxiety and depression medications because there was a point where it was just, just even talking about being in the Marine Corps, it caused me great amounts of anxiety, and so I stay on those pretty regularly.
And now you intend to give back and work with veterans.
I'm actually in a program right now called the Clay Hunt Fellowship Program, and it's a part of an organization called Team Rubicon, which is an almost entirely veterans, like, emergency disaster relief organization that goes to, like, Haiti or wherever. They've done some COVID vaccine things lately, and so, and then of course I teach the reboot courses as well.
Is there anything you would like to add that I did not ask?
No, but I really think this is an awesome program, and I hope you get lots of fun veteran stories.
Well, before we end, is there anything you would like to tell future generations, your female future Marines?
You belong, and you can do whatever you want to do.
All right. Well, Emily, I want to thank you for sitting with me today, and it was a great honor to meet you and to listen to your story and your service. Thank you for your service, truly, and keep up the good fight.
Thanks.
All right.